Hey everyone, Aaron Lovejoy here for Miniature Monthly. This is our first video in the Weathering Vehicles 101 series. It's called Hidden Rust and Airbrushing Phase. In this episode, I'll cover my initial stages of rust and how I airbrush this beast of a tank, the 6x6 assault vehicle from Secret Weapon Miniatures. Let's get started. So my first step is to prime everything black. Today I use the Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch 2X. I get this at Home Depot. This works really well for me here in San Diego. Obviously, if your environment is different where you live, you may have to use a different primer. But I really do like the 2X primer. It's very black, and it gets the model black very quickly. The second step I always do is take a look at the model itself and find areas where the primer didn't reach. I do this when I'm airbrushing primer on as well. You can see up in here and there. And I'll just take some Stynylrez primer and dab it in just like that. And basically what I'm doing is making sure everything's blacked out. Don't really have to do these wheel wells, but might as well be thorough. I'll look around the whole model and find just any areas like this where the primer didn't reach. The reason for this is once I start painting, I do not want any of the resin color or whatever color the model originally was. I don't want that showing through. There's nothing worse than getting halfway through airbrushing a vehicle and you find a big spot that you missed, and then you have to go back in and blacken it out. And so anyways, this is what I do with every project when I'm painting armies, painting display figures. Always add that little bit of black back in. Just make sure you don't get it on there too thick. You want it to be thinned out on the edges so that you don't have lumpy paint, because primer tends to be a little thicker than normal. But yeah, I think that's good. I'll do the same with the rest of these pieces, and then we'll get started with the weathering effects. So the first thing before anything else, before any of the airbrushing or anything on this tank, we're going to put an underlying layer of rust onto the vehicle, just to begin with. To do this, I typically use a dark reddish brown, like Rhinox Hide from Games Workshop. I also use Scrag Brown from Games Workshop, Harvest Brown from Reaper Master Series, Lava Orange from Reaper Master Series, and then Cygnus Yellow, which I don't use by itself, but sometimes I'll mix in with the Lava Orange to make it even brighter. For this, I want my colors to be a little more opaque base to them. We'll be using the Secret Weapon paints later on in the process, and they're a little translucent, which is perfect for weathering after you've painted everything. But since this is going on before we paint, I want my colors to build up a little bit quicker, and so I typically use these colors. So you're using an orangish brown for your mid-tone, a dark reddish brown for the darkest areas, and then a bright orange, sometimes mixed with yellow for the brightest areas. You got to remember, old rust is darker and it starts getting almost black, and new rust is very orange. So we want sort of a combination of all that factored in. Also, let me get that water off here. You know me, I like to keep my paints thick to start with, and then I thin them when I want them thinned. So any water on top of my palette can lead to paints being thinned before I want them. The other thing, here's a little trick. If you're wanting to white out your palette, I'm going to take off this, and hopefully my paints don't all run all over the place. And I'm going to put a piece of white paper in my palette here. That soaked through pretty quickly. Sometimes it doesn't, so I just flip it over to make sure that it's thoroughly soaked through. And that's just plain white paper from my printer. And then we can put palette paper over, perfectly white. So that helps me see my colors a little bit better. The other thing we're going to do, like I said, I want my paints a little thicker for this process, but I do want a little bit of water in them. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water in each color. Not a lot, just a little bit to get it flowing. And then we're ready to paint. To apply this paint to the tank, you could either start by airbrushing some of these colors, but I just prefer to use a sponge, and any old blister pack sponge will work. However, I find that the ones that come out of Games Workshop cases or the Battle Foam cases, their foam is a little bit more coarse and seems to put a better texture down. So let's get started with that texture. Alright, I pulled some foam off of one of my GW cases. As you can see, it's pretty coarse, I guess. And we're going to get started with this. I'm going to start with the dark brown first, and just apply it everywhere on the tank. Also, you'll notice that I have the tank in pieces. This is to aid in the painting process. You'll find a lot of times if you put everything together on a tank, wheels, the tank tracks especially, the guns, it just makes it a little bit harder to paint. So if you're trying to go fast, if this is for your army or your commission painter or whatever, or even display painter, this will speed up the process quite a bit, just keeping it separate at first. The other thing I do is I just use my P3 bottles, put a little blue tack on the back side of this wheel, and I'll stick this down, and that allows me to have a handy dandy holding thing for the different parts. So first step here will be the darker brown, and if you have like a little napkin next to you, you can kind of dab it off, because a lot of times the sponge will soak up way too much paint. And then be sure to hold on to your sponge and don't drop it like I just did. And what we're going to do is, see that? You can see a little bit. We're going to put this everywhere. I'm not worried about parts or where I would like rust eventually, but I am going to literally place this everywhere, and the quicker I do it, the more random it'll be. I don't want to create a pattern per se. Luckily, most of this will get covered with the airbrushing, so it's okay if it's a little bit has a little bit of a pattern to it, but it's always good to practice, because you can do this after the fact and put it right on top of the airbrushing to get some extra rusting effects. And if you've already practiced, if you're already used to putting it on randomly, you will always put it on randomly. So this is kind of, you can just practice as you go, and this is a great thing to practice on, because you don't have to worry about it being perfect. Just make sure there's rust everywhere, because we don't want to start pulling off paint and later and the rust not be there. So that's the dark brown. I don't wash off the sponge or anything. I'm going to switch right into the harvest brown from Reaper. This I'm going to put a little more sparingly. You can see it going on there. And again, just quickly. I'm not worried about it going directly over the dark brown, but it's good if it does in areas. You don't want to cover it completely, but you just want this to get on there nicely. I always make sure that edges get good rust, because in the end I'm going to try to pick out those edges with my other techniques, and you want there to be rust definitely on edges of things, because that usually gets banged up the most. And you want that rust to show through. And it's probably going to be the areas that have the freshest rust, because they get dinged up a lot. I'm going to switch now to the Scrag Brown and put that again in areas around where I put the Harvest Brown. You could also use Bloodstone from Privateer Press as your orangish brown, as well as Morphing Brown is a great rust color from Games Workshop. So all these colors, we're basically just looking for tones. So you want a pretty vibrant, not desaturated. You want it to be saturated with an orangish color, but brown. Let's get down here. I'm being a little bit more precise than normal for this video. When I do a bunch of tanks, I'm very haphazard with it. I just bam, 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 bam. But I kind of want you to see what I'm looking at and where I'm placing this stuff. So it's starting to look like, my friends call this the bacon stage, and because it's starting to look like a piece of bacon. Now we will grab that explosion orange from Reaper, and we will put it literally just in really select spots, not a whole lot of this, because this is your brightest color. We will come back later and we can enhance things with it again. So I don't need tons of it, but just a little bit, because we're going to get we got three or four shades of color on here very quickly and very randomly. There you go. Got a disgusting rusted tank. Now, if we want to add just a little bit of this yellow to the explosion orange to get a really, really vibrant, really new rust, let's just. Remember, all these colors are wet, kind of wet, going on wet, and they will dry a little bit darker. So sometimes you have to put a couple layers, especially if you want the rust to be really, really vibrant. Yeah, that's that. And now we'll do our tank. We'll probably just speed up this part of the video so you can see it happening, but you don't have to watch for 50 hours. Alright, now be thinking areas that you think would naturally have the most rust or the most damaged, most scratched paint. So obviously down here on the wheels, the drive shafts of each wheel, maybe in the front of the tank towards the bottom, the undersides of this, which you won't see most of this area, but we still want to put it in there because if we end up having rust there, we want there to be cool rust effects. Maybe in the back, some of these doors and stuff might have areas of more rust. So we're just going to add that brighter orange, especially in those areas, just in case. That's the stuff that's gonna get scratched the first, and so it's gonna have and most often, so it'll always have I think new rust on it, newer rust, because the old rust will be getting scratched off quite a bit more. So you just want to think about that when you're actually applying the rust. Alright, so that is our first application of rust. Things to watch out for is make sure that when you put it on, the paint isn't too thick. I mean, you'll see it on the model, but don't put big gobs of paint on because that will actually create a texture that you don't want in the end result. You want that paint to be on there thin, so just that's why I put a little bit of water into the paint, but I still wanted it to build up in color fairly quickly so that you could actually see it, because there's nothing worse than putting rust effects on for hours and there's no change in color. So we got a good base for our rust right now, and we're going to move on to the next step. So here's the secret. Mold builder. I learned this technique years ago watching the 7-Day Army Painter video that Brandon Palmer did for Cool Mini or Not. And this was his way of masking things off, and it's a fantastic idea. Basically, this is just a mold builder that you buy from Michael's or Hobby Lobby, any craft store. It's made for making molds, but the cool thing about it is you can dab it on with a sponge, and it looks like realistic rust, basically, or chipped paint, and it's very easy to remove. I've had a lot of problems with liquid masks not coming off or being so stuck on there that they pull the paint off, things like that. So this actually works really well. It looks kind of funny when it goes on, but when it dries, I believe it shrinks a little bit and it creates a really cool chipped paint effect. So again, I put a little of the mold builder on my palette, and then I take my sponge and dab it off. And basically we're going to apply it. The other thing that I really like about this stuff is that it goes on white, but then dries clear. So that allows me to see where I put it, and I don't put too much rust. I don't, forget a panel on the tank. That's always awful. When you have an entire chipped tank and then there's one panel that doesn't have any rust at all, that's a bad deal. So I like the fact that it goes on kind of whitish, and yeah, I wouldn't mind if it dried white, but it dries clear. So I'm going to put a little bit on the wheels. They're gonna take a lot of abuse, so maybe I'll put a little bit more right here. And you can already see where it's starting to clear up a little bit. On other areas like this gun, I'll put a couple little areas like here. The thing with chipped paint and rust and all that stuff is you don't want to do too much, because we've all seen that tank that's just covered in rust, and I don't think that's totally realistic. I mean, sometimes it can look really cool if that's your thing. You've got a death waste ash world or something that literally vehicles rust in hours. That would be kind of cool, but otherwise, don't do too much. Do just enough. We can always add rust later, but it's harder to take it away. So we'll just put some blops. You can see the little specks and flecks. That will leave really nice chips in our paint, and our underlying rust effect that we did will allow it to look really cool. It gives us less work, basically. I want to hit top edges of things. Anything that looks like it would be bumped and knocked into would probably get a little bit more rust. But like I said, don't go overboard, because we can always add to this. The outer edges of things usually get a little bit more dinged, so I can be a little bit more liberal with my application of this. There, maybe the back side of this would get a little bit more, this underside. But if you look at pictures, reference pictures, there's always, rust is a funny thing. The way things weather, sometimes there's a weak spot in the paint, and it rusts like crazy in that area. So let's maybe say that area right there is a weak spot in our paint. Maybe it got hit, at one point with a mortar or something, or it's just, when the guys were painting it, they didn't paint it quite as good as the rest. It wasn't as thick of a layer. So it's experienced the elements a little bit more. You can already see the top. It looks like I haven't done anything. So that's why you got to make sure to go quick and put it on, and then make sure a panel's finished before you move on to the next panel, because you're not going to be able to see it in a few minutes. And you don't want to do it again. Then we'll do this part of the tank. Again, I want to concentrate on upper edges of things. This area right there where the turret's going to be, I think would receive a lot more scratches and stuff with the turret spinning around and maybe rocks getting stuck in there and stuff. So we'll just put a little bit more there. You can see where this would it's kind of fun, because you don't have to think about it very much. I feel like a lot of my painting is very, my mind is constantly thinking about what I'm doing, and is the blend right, whatever. This is more haphazard, and while you still want to think about it a little bit, you can kind of let your mind go and think more about the battle that this thing's about to be in. How many renegade guardsmen you can kill with this tank, that type of thing. Alright, so you can see the mold builder has pretty much gone clear, and now we're ready for the next step. Now we need to zero out the color, and by that I mean we're going to basically put black back over the top of all this rust and the mold builder and all that stuff. The reason for this is we want to have an even base to put our final colors on. You could spray directly over this stage like this. You can get some cool effects of the rust kind of showing through the paint a little bit, but I generally like to put a layer of black over. So to do this, I don't use the spray-on primer because it actually eats the mold builder a little bit and it makes it harder to remove at the end. So we're going to use some of our Stynylrez paint. I always put a couple drops of my thinning solution into the cup first, and then we'll just pour in the Stynylrez black primer. Give it a quick swish around in the cup. Throw my brush. This is extreme painting at its best. So here we go. I'm using the Patriot 105 airbrush, again at about 40 psi. It seems to spray really well, the primer. And we're just going to spray it on. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want it to be mostly black. You also want to be real careful about how you handle the model at this stage, because the mold builder will come off with light handling, so just be careful. If you're wondering how long it takes for the mold builder to dry, it's literally 10 or 15 minutes. It air dries. Probably another reason why it smells so bad coming out of the can. It air dries very quickly, and I've had times where I literally put it on and sprayed over it with it wet, because it dries no matter what. And so if you're trying to save time, like I always am, it's a nice feature of it. So yeah, it's all blacked out. I'm going to do the rest of the vehicle and we'll be right back. Wow, we are right back to black. All that work, and it's a little depressing when you see the tank black again. But now comes the fun part. We are going to airbrush some colors on this tank. Also, take a look underneath. I didn't block out all the rust on the underside, so that way I can kind of show you how the rust can show through the paint. Looks like the paint is actually thinning and not just rusted. And I only did that on the bottom because I think that would be a good spot for it. Plus, if it looks horrible, we'll just look at the top. You can see where my fingers have kind of rubbed off some of the mold builder, so I'm just going to reapply that a little bit. And we're going to airbrush right over it, because it's not going to matter if it's wet a little bit. Okay, so the important thing when painting over your rust effects is choosing colors to paint. Now, it is best to choose lighter colors. The reason for this is the rust just shows up way better. I've painted some darker tanks, as you can see with this Ultramarines Land Raider, and the rust, although in the pictures the rust shows up okay, in person, it was just two dark color paints next to each other, and you really had to get up close to see the rust well. So be careful in choosing your color selections. You want to go with lighter colors for sure. If you do go with darker colors, you're gonna have to work a little bit harder to make it show up. So that's my first recommendation. For this tank, we're going to go with a cream color, and so I'm going with Rucksack Tan from P3, Midnight White Base, and Midnight White Highlight. We'll also add in a little bit of Coal Black for shadowing, but that will come later on when we get the secondary color on. So let's get started with that. Alright, we're going to start with our Rucksack Tan and start from the underside of the model and work our way up. I'm going to use the black color of the tank as my ally in this, and basically get some different shades of the Rucksack Tan. So I'll get darker colors and lighter colors. So we'll just start. I'm using my normal thickness of paint, which is just thick enough, or just thin enough to go through the airbrush. So it's fairly thick paint. We're going to see the color build up very quickly. I'll just kind of use light strokes, and I'm not going real close because I don't want it to be all blotchy. I want it to be more thinned out, blended. You can see in some areas I've left a little bit of the black showing through, so it's actually making a dark rucksack tan, whereas in other areas it's a little bit brighter, such as these. You can also see just slightly in areas right there that rust pattern showing through a little bit. So that's actually kind of cool. I kind of dig that. But I didn't want that rust pattern showing through everywhere. So, you know, on the underside of the tank, maybe it makes more sense because the paint is worn away could be worn away gradually in spots. There's a little more friction. So that kind of looks cool. Also, you can see I'm using a dry erase marker stuffed in the hole for the turret, so I can hold the tank a little bit better without touching it. Sometimes just using random stuff around the house, you can be inventive and get cool little holders for your models. Okay, so that's the first layer. That's the rucksack tan. It is actually our shadow color. I don't typically spray the entire vehicle with one particular color, but since this was our shadow color, I kind of wanted it everywhere so I could then cover it without worrying about having to re-put in my shadows. Also, you probably noticed that it's not completely even, and I like that as well. You can see in here I've still got some shadow areas from the primer. I like all of that. The key with the airbrush is you want it to work for you, not against you. So keeping some of those shadows in, that's why I always start with black. Some people start with the mid-tone gray or white even, but I prefer the black because I'm getting multiple colors out of this first shade of color. I'm getting a dark rucksack tan, I'm getting a medium rucksack tan, and I'm getting the actual rucksack tan. But there's nowhere on the vehicle per se that I have sprayed it 100% rucksack tan. It's always a shade of it. I can always come back in later and spray more if I need to, but for now I think that's perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and finish airbrushing the base coats on the rest of these models, and we'll come back with the first mid-tone color on this vehicle. So we've sprayed the entire vehicle with our darkest shade, the rucksack tan. I don't know if you can tell very well, but the front of the vehicle is lighter in color than the back of the vehicle. Same with the top of the turret. It's a little bit darker in back than it is in front. Also, again, we have not sprayed it completely opaque 100% rucksack tan. There's areas where there's darkened shadows. Then that's our primer showing through. So we're starting to get some detail in the model just with the initial airbrushing. So we've got that. Let's head on to doing the Minoth White base. So when applying the first mid-tone color, we're not going to spray from the bottom at all. We're going to spray from the top at about a 45-degree angle all the way around, and then we're going to intensify it in the front because that's what we want our focal point to be. Always keeping conscious of the angles so that you can save some of those shadows. Also from the top, I'm only spraying from this angle towards the back because I want there to be shadows back here. If you vary the intensity of how hard you pull back on the spray, you can get different shades with each color. So that's an important thing to remember. Really helps save you a lot of time in the painting process later. So I'm also going to hit the what are these things called? The doors, the hatches, a little bit more, and then right in front pretty well. I think I'll do the cannon. And I've checked it before. This is actually the top, so I'm going to spray it lighter than the bottom. But maybe I'll put a couple little squirts in the bottom just so it's not completely dark. The front of the gun is going to be a steel color, so I'm just going to leave that not painted. And then we'll do a good way to tell which side is the top of the tires is put a little spray right there. That's going to be where the light source is coming. So we'll spray all of these tires the same way. So you can see the only color that actually takes a little bit longer to airbrush is the shadow base color. After that, it's all good. The midtones and the highlights all go on fairly quickly because they're using the colors underneath to intensify them. Again, I'm making the front of the tank brighter than the back. Again, be a little mindful of your angles when you're spraying because you don't want to cover up shadows. You want it all the airbrushing works for you. Okay, I think that's the mid-tone color is on there good. And we'll be back with the highlight color. Now we're on to our highlight phase. And remember, the highlight's just that, it's a highlight. So you don't want it everywhere. Again, you want to keep your angles at good angles. I'm spraying again at about 45 degrees. And I'm just going to spray a little bit in areas to create a little bit more of a highlight effect. put a little bit on that back tubing. Just let it stick out a little bit more. Alright, and we'll do our gun barrel. Just a little bit. And our wheels. And again, the wheels are straight up and down, so make sure that your angle is pretty good so that you don't blow out the midtone or the shadow stuff. You can even choose to shoot up onto the wheel, the black part of the wheel, because we're going to paint that again later. And it's literally just the overspray hits the part of the wheel that we want to paint. See, it's mostly up on the top of the wheel, or on the rubber part of the wheel. All right. Then we'll do the front of the tank. Again, using the angle of our airbrush as our ally. And if you have a business card available, you can place it down as a quick mask. You get some sharp edges to things. We could do that right here. Just like that. Put some right there. And we'll go like this. We're starting to get some areas where it gets brighter. It's a hard spray. Keeping my airbrush clean and not getting too clogged up there. Like this. Right. The front side of the turret mount. Back here, we could actually do a little bit of light. Not too much though. Got a hatch right here, and on the other side. And what else? That hatch and this hatch right here. And maybe we will, oops, this. You notice my spray is pretty fine, and that's with a fairly thick paint. So if you thin it just right, you're good to go. I think these need to be a little bit brighter. If you go a little bit too bright or you have some overspray, it's okay. You can always come back and fix it with the airbrush later. I'm going to put a couple little highlights right there. Alright. So that's that. I think we'll also do a little bit of highlighting right on these edges. You see those little windows show up a little bit better. I'm going to hit this a little bit better. Masking that off so it pops a little bit. This area to be a little bit better. So at this point I'm just doing some micro adjustments to the airbrush. You can see it's just a matter of going back and forth a little bit, bumping up some of these highlights with our mask. In place to give us a little bit better visualization of the vehicle. Put that right there. This is a much brighter color, so you're noticing that I'm having to do my hard sprays quite a bit more. But that's okay, that's what we want. We just keep that nozzle clean. We got to do these hatches over here. Pop those a little bit more. This hatch up here. It's not really hatch, it's plate. I'm going to go ahead and do this one again. And maybe we'll get these one more time. Sometimes you can bend your little mask to fit the plate. Oh, that was too much. So I'll show you how to fix that. So that's the highlight layer. Let me just give it another look over. I like everything. Yeah, I think I'm good with that. Let's take one more look at this. I'm going to do a really light dusting back here on those areas, and it will just, at a good angle, it will pick up. It'll give me a nice contrast of highlight right back there. Just doing little squirts on things to make minor adjustments. Now that we have our business card mask, give that a little bit better highlight there. Hit this area right here a little bit more. And there's a couple little window slits for people to view out of. Hit those. Add some more. Now, what we want to do, since we're nearing the end of our highlight stage, let's pull my vehicle holder out and take the turret off and put them together and see how they look. See how they look as a team. I think that will work. Alright, now on to the next step. Alright, so this is a futuristic vehicle, a sci-fi vehicle type deal. And so I've been looking a lot at some different art books. I check out Titanfall, the art of Titanfall. There's tons of good references for vehicle type patterns and markings and all that stuff. I want to put a teal block down the side of this tank, and we'll do that right now. So you just got to be really careful. You still have your mold builder on there, and when you put the tape on, it's going to pull that off. So we just want to be real careful when applying the tape. The trick is to get a straight line, and I think I want my line, I want this side to be teal of the tank. So I'm going to put this line on, and I'm going to try to get it on there as straight as possible. So we'll get it in an angle I can see. And we'll put this right here, real lightly. It'd be really cool if I had a pair of scissors, but I don't, so I'm going to just rip it. I'll rip off a couple other pieces and just stick them on my palette real quick. And we will grab something that we can push down on this. I'm just going to grab my tool that I cleaned my airbrush with, and we're gonna push down this tape around all those cracks and ridges. Let's actually take it off of that vehicle right now. It's obviously much easier if you do it on a very flat paneled vehicle, but this one's bumpy and it is what it is, and we just got to work with it. Let's be real careful. We'll roll it around down under here. I'm not going to worry about the underside of the tank so much, but we definitely want to get that one corner that the tape ran out. Having your tape piece long enough so it doesn't run out is good too. This is Tamiya masking tape. It works really good. It's probably the best that I've used for masking off vehicles and stuff. It seems to come off fairly easily. It's not super sticky, but it doesn't let the paint through as much. And I will show you some tricks on getting the paint on there and not seeping under as much here in a second. So we got the front of that. Grab another little piece of tape. Get that corner right there. Alright, so that's taped off. Put another piece up here to tape off the rest of the section. Now, things to remember when you're taping off, you want to make sure that this seal is good, because paint will fly under there and hit this other side of the model and color stuff that you don't want colored. So you just got to be careful. So that's that. So that's that part of the tank. I'll put it back on and make sure that turret is nice and straight. Rip off another piece of tape. Kind of get that stuck down. Actually, it's got to be on this side. And just kind of lay it down and eyeball it to make sure it's fairly straight. So you got a fairly straight line, because there's nothing worse than a crooked line, unless you want it crooked. Another thing you can do here, quick, I'll show you. Make sure that's straight. Put another piece of tape on the vehicle real lightly that is straight, and then no matter how you got to push this to fit things, you'll always know where the edge should be, so you can adjust your tape accordingly. So see how that tape is fairly straight. And then we press it down. You can use a sculpting tool with this. Anything that will get you, that will push that tape down. Now, if there's areas that simply the tape wouldn't push, that's okay. So in this spot, since the hull of the tank is kind of weird, it's pulling the tape this way, so I'm adjusting the tape back so that it looks like a straight line right there. There's a couple spots right in here that will be a little bit wonky, but we can fix that with the paintbrush. So that will work. All right, I will put some more tape there and then tape off the gun barrel if it needs it, and we will be right back to show you airbrushing that section. We're going to go for a teal stripe, so to do that I'm going to start with a Calibyte Green shadow color, Marine Teal from Reaper Master Series, and then Ghost White for the highlight. If you notice, I usually try, especially with armies, I try to use colors straight out of the pot. I don't mix colors together because it's very hard to match those later unless you have a good way of storing that paint, which I know some people do. It's just easier this way. It's easier for me to remember it was Marine Teal, Calibyte Green, and Ghost White. Now, once we get to the Ghost White, if that's too bright, I might mix it with the teal, but then that's a pretty simplistic mix. So let's get started with that. We'll take our parts. We got all the tape on. You'll notice after taping a bunch of vehicles that a lot of times the tape pulls up a little bit, so just push it back down, and get it as good as you can. And then we'll load up our airbrush with this green. Get started. Again, these colors are on the thicker side. Like I normally thin my paints. They're not super thinned out because, especially on over this tape, we don't want it to seep under, and that's what usually happens. You have seepage and the paint is too wet and it goes under. So the other thing you'll notice is I will be spraying very dry, like light coats, letting them dry in between. It still goes very fast, but this avoids the paint from seeping under. So let's get rolling. Make sure that tape's down good. Anywhere where the tape meets, you want to be kind of straight on with your spray. If you get too cutesy and underneath it, it could have a chance to shoot under the tape. So do your best. Now the top of this is all going to be more teal color, so I'm spraying it real light. You can see that tan color still coming through. I'm not too worried about that. But everywhere I need a nice dark teal, I'm making sure that the green is very prominent. And when I can, I spray from this angle coming in so that it sprays away from the crack. We're out of paint. We're out of paint. Alright, we got some green paint back. And let's finish this off. Again, notice the paint is pretty much dry as I spray it. I'm not putting a whole lot down. I'm controlling the amount of paint so that I don't have the seepage under the tape. Alright, I'm going to switch out colors and do the teal. Alright, here we go with the teal. Let's move this over a little bit. This is a hard part a little bit because we have to match the intensity or the way the highlights worked on the rest of the tank, but we can't see that. So we have to kind of remember where we put highlights here, here, up there, over here. So right now that doesn't matter as much. I just want it to be lighter in the front and darker in the back. But eventually that will matter with the next highlight color. And what I might do, because I want this teal to be kind of bright, I might overspray the highlights a little bit and then come back in and shoot the teal one more time. But for now, let's just get this on. I totally botched it. I need to make 3 of these wheels teal. So we didn't put the darker green on there, but I think it'll be okay. We'll just spray the teal right over the wheel, what we sprayed before. And then we'll just put a highlight on it. And there's going to be a lot of mud and grime on here, so I think it will be okay. Let's do these 3 teal. So it's really good, especially if you're doing a big army, to pay attention to the step that you're on and what needs to be painted, because it's a real bummer to have to come back through and start over with the original color when you're almost done. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so I'm going to switch to the brighter color, our Ghost White. And I'm not even going to worry about really cleaning out my cup. I'm just going to add the color. So it will kind of mix in with the teal that's already in the cup. Maybe that will tone it down just enough that we need. Not much though. It's not going to mix that much in the cup, even though there's that teal color running around in there. Alright, let's see what this does. If we get rid of all that teal on the brush. Okay, now it's the lighter color. We don't want that too bright, we just want it bright enough. And we'll do this last one. That's the top of our wheel. So those are on there. We will switch to the those little Alright, so that is that. We can always come back and adjust it even further. Usually I just spray the general light on and then I come back and I fix stuff. Let's begin with doing this. So the further the airbrush is back, you see it's just a really light blend, and then if we get it in closer, we can get it brighter if we need to. And then we will do this. And that. And do a light dusting all the way back, and then we can start picking things out. Oops. Right here, a little bit. You remember these things? I had twisted that. Do that. I thought about it for a second, and I think I will add a little bit more teal. It still looks a little bit green to me. So I'm going to spray this teal right over the white that I sprayed, and kind of bring back some of the tealish tones. Just a little bit. And I'll do it up here, top of the tank. All right. Here is the scary part. We will take the tape off and hope that none of our paint comes off. I'm sure some of the mold builder will come off, and that's okay. Especially in these sections that we push down really hard. But I always like to take the tape off a little bit slow, just so that I guess if it would rip the paint off, it rips it off anyways, but I don't know, I get scared. That definitely looks more teal after the tape is off. You can see we oversprayed a little bit in areas right there. But otherwise it's a pretty clean line over a very detailed surface, so we did a good job there. Let's get this off. I added, I just use regular blue painter's tape to mask off big sections. I never stick it down real hard to the actual paint. It's mostly stuck to the yellow tape, so it seems to come off fairly easily. You got to be careful with blue painter's tape because it does have a tendency to pull paint off, so you just got to be careful. Alright. Did it. And I think that line matches up pretty well all the way across, so we didn't do a horrible job. That put the barrel in. It's going to sag a little bit, but yeah, that's what it looks like. I will paint a little bit of teal on the gun barrel part right there, but I figured I could do that by hand easier than just taping it and guessing. Because there was tape all over everything before. But yeah, that's the initial airbrush phase is done.